Welcome to the Gamification Quest podcast, brought to you by Sententia Gamification. I'm your host, Monica Cornetti, and here we dive deep into the transformative world of gamification. From our origins in 2014 as Gamification Talk Radio until now, our quest remains the same: to put an end to dry, dull, and ineffective corporate training and adult education. Because your learners deserve better. Are you ready? Let's get questing. Hi, my name is Monica Cornetti. Welcome to the Gamification Quest podcast. Today, I have two guests, and it's really fun how they got here. So we'll talk about that. But I have Bret Wardle and Mike Hyzy, and they are co-authors of a book called Gamification for Product Excellence. And I met them both on LinkedIn, which is how we've met a lot of people over the past couple of years, and made connections with them and knew we had things in common with gamification, although their field of study is a little bit different. But then lo and behold, I'm in the Hilton in New Orleans, hustling to get somewhere. I don't even know where I was going. I'm going up the escalator and Mike stops me and says, "Hey," and I'm looking at him like, "Hey," and he introduced himself. You know how you meet someone in two different circumstances and you're like, I know this person, but I have no idea who this person is. And because I was in the wrong frame because he was in a different setting. When he told me who he was, I was like, oh my gosh, come with me, come to our event. Because they were actually on their way to the airport to catch a plane at the end of their conference. So let me just read a little bit about them. Then I want to ask you about that conference. Mike's been leading product strategy management and development for years. And after a while doing that, he realized gamification could be the ultimate game changer for creating engaging products. And he is co-author of the book with Bret on Gamification for Product Excellence. Bret's based in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's a seasoned game and software professional with over 15 years of experience in crafting immersive games, innovative software, and user-friendly apps. So that's a very cool combination. So let me ask you first, because I think I just drug you into my event, said, sit at that table over there. I went off in another direction. So what was the conference you were speaking at?
So
were you speaking? Were you speaking there? Okay.
Yep. So we did a presentation at the Product Development and Management Association annual conference, the Innovate conference. Yeah, Bret and I spoke that day and the conference wrapped up. And then you were on the escalator and I'm like, I remember that face from LinkedIn.
I know this. And I'm like, when you said your name, I was like, okay. And I just couldn't, because again, two different settings, it just not expecting to see. So that was really good. And when I look back, I was like, we talked about being in New Orleans at the same time. I just didn't put it all together. So for what you were speaking on, what was your frame in your presentation? You were bringing gamification into your presentation?
Yeah. So to a little bit of background about PDMA, they are both an academic and a membership organization. So the first part of the conference was academics from all over the world talking about new research and product development, product management, et cetera. And then the back half of the conference, members who have distinct skill sets like me and Bret come in and give presentations. And ours reflect our skill sets, which was gamification for product development. And Bret started really focused on what's gamification, game mechanics, et cetera. And then I talked about how do you apply those skills to developing a product, developing product processes, right? You could gamify the process. We could have fun while we're building products. And then how do you gamify your career, right? How do you set your own goals and boss battles and things like that to really develop the outcomes that you're trying to get in your career?
You co-presented, you and Bret were together.
Yep.
And how were you received? Is this something that people are talking about actively?
Yeah, I think we scored an 89% on our, or a 98%
pretty darn
on our
good. That's good for an academic conference. That's very good. Yeah.
So well received. Bret, any thoughts?
No, yeah, I think we got some great questions afterwards. We met tons of people that I'm still having conversations now. I don't even know how long it's been, like a month now after the conference. Yeah, I'm still having back and forth conversations on LinkedIn with a few of the people that I met. Some great networking, some great conversations that we've been having afterwards.
That's very good. So now you published the book when?
around
This
October
year?
1st.
Last
Yeah,
year?
yeah, within 3 weeks ago. So it's hot off the press.
Oh, oh, I didn't realize that. Well, that's really good. All
Yeah.
right. Now, the story is that you two met writing the book. And how'd that happen, Brett?
Yeah, that's correct. Like we both were kind of in our own separate spaces, and we had the publisher reach out to us as experts in our fields. Mike with a really heavy like product background and leadership and strategy background, and me with a little more of a like I came as an ex game designer. Like I worked 10 years in game design and have since kind of moved over to software design, and I'm trying to find that like mix between the two. That's kind of been my niche is finding where what we do in game design can apply to software design. And we got together and talked about an outline Mike had prepared, and we were on board with working together. I think the spaces that we were in makes for a great mix. And having now read through the book a few times in the editing process, I think it's a really great back and forth. You can sometimes tell like the chapters that Mike wrote, the chapters that I wrote, and the mixes in between were like we added to each other's work. And I think it works out really well. We have a really good collaborative spirit between us that I think has made the book fantastic because you get a little bit of both. It's not just a game person writing, it's not just a product person writing, it's a very well rounded
Yeah,
sort of set of
very good.
skills.
Very good. Well, so who's the publisher?
Pact Publishing out of the UK.
What is it called?
Pact, P-A-C-K-T.
Okay, okay. And we can get this book where?
Amazon, Barnes and
Amazon.
Noble, Google it. It's in the book publishing system.
Good,
So
very good. Yes, very good. All right, so let's go back to the very beginning then. So you're coming from a game background, Brett, but what, and I don't know who to address this to exactly, but what started you getting into this journey of gamification, studying game psychology? What got you going with this, Brett?
Well, for me, I had worked in games for a number of years. I had been through two game studio closures. I had been sleeping under my desk, doing what was the traditional like early 2000s game worker crunch period where we were doing 100-hour weeks. And ultimately like I got married, I had kids, and I just couldn't do that anymore. And I had had other engineering friends leave games and say, hey, you should come to software. Like we left games and went to software and doubled our salaries and halved our hours in one move. And so I was like, oh, that sounds fantastic. Like, yeah, I would like to do that. And so I had an engineering friend from games get me a job in software. And that's kind of what I found is like I found at the start, software was kind of like, oh, this just isn't, the camaraderie isn't there, the fun in the building isn't there. And so I tried to just start instilling some of those things, some of the things that we as workers in games would do, tried to bring that into software, tried to bring some of the practices and brainstorming and research and some of those things into software. And right about that same time, UX was kind of taking off. And that's when I realized like, hey, a UX designer is like almost the same skill as a product designer or as a game designer. We're talking with users, we're building fun, we're making things that work and are engaging and easy to remember. And that's kind of where I found like, hey, this is the skill set is very similar. Like if you take a Venn diagram of game designer and UX designer, there's a lot of overlap there. And so I just
Yeah.
kind of kept working my way through
Yeah.
that and found more and more similarities and just kind of found myself in this sort of role where that's now kind of what I do. That's what I found my specialty as a designer and product manager.
All right, very good. So how about you, Mike? What was your journey here?
great question. So I was an econ grad in college, and afterwards I was working on a startup in Chicago. We were the first one to accept food stamps for mobile grocery delivery. So if you put yourself in that situation, right, you have neighborhoods that didn't have grocery stores or delivering food, and we're trying to get the neighborhood on board. So I started using games and developing games to get people excited about it, right? Like the whole punch ticket that Brett gives a good example of. We had a wheel that you'd spin, right? Oh, you got a free pizza or a free bag of apples or things like that. Started using games and seeing their effects in that industry. And from that social enterprise that I helped started, I moved on to a nutrition app and then a large international fitness company, and I was in charge of their app and their gym management software. And gamification fits really well in some areas than others, right? In the fitness industry, there's challenges, there's leaderboards. It was really ripe. So I started reading a lot of like Richard Thaler, Nudge, right, about choice architecture, how people make decisions, and then read Muriel's book, right, How to Build Habit Forming Products. And he endorsed the book, like, and he was the one that got me into gamification. And I started taking his teachings and then started designing the apps and the gym management platforms to take advantage of that. So that really got me in gamification, and I saw the benefit of it, right? And that's 2 times in a row that I brought game mechanics into the industry that I was working in, and saw the benefit of it. So after
Right.
that, I've been in consulting for about 5 years, primarily in healthcare, and it's another industry that's really could use game mechanics to get positive outcomes. Again, with fitness and nutrition, these are things that are both good for the business and good for the user, right? When you talk about medication adherence,
Yes.
scheduling appointments, things like that, like gamification has a huge impact in the healthcare field.
Yeah, I wish I remembered her name because she had, one of those people that has a huge impact on your thinking. And I interviewed a doctor years ago, but she was telling me the cost to the healthcare industry from people who don't take their meds. And it's,
Exactly.
I mean, I know cost is a lot, but I was like, well, what is it cost? And she goes, even when we give it to them for free, it's still this any kind of long-term med that they don't see that immediate change because of taking it. And then like diabetes med, you would lose this limb if you didn't monitor your blood sugar. And yeah, but that wasn't going to happen to me, right? And so that using the prompts and the nudging, love all the books that you mentioned. Those are great. We recommend them highly as we think about habits and encouraging people to focus on my thought for the week is the invisible creates the visible, right? So, what are we doing to make sure that what we see out here is what we want to see? There's got to be that other work. So, that's really, really good. All right. So, both of you, I come from really more of a thought I was going to be like a second grade teacher. That's what I always thought my whole life. Like, because my teacher said, you're going to be a teacher and you're going to do great things. So I assumed from that point forward, that was absolute truth until I went into my first second grade classroom as a student teacher. I can't do this. I love children, but not 30 of y'all at one time. But anyhow, so I come from a much more analog, hands-on, manipulatives. You two are coming from a much more tech app, software, game design background. So as we think about your field that you're in or software development apps, help me because my audience is mostly training professionals, learning and development professionals. What are you seeing? What's your foray into that as far as technology and training and education? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, I also teach at the collegiate level. Like I teach at Newmont College here in Salt Lake City. Prior to that, I taught at ITT Tech before it went defunct. But I've been teaching for over 10 years now. And like you mentioned, like I don't think I could teach anything below the college level. Like even the college level sometimes
Like those
is a
children,
little bit
yes.
much. But I do love it. And a lot of that is like I try to instill these things in my teaching. One of the courses I regularly teach is an entrepreneurship class where the students come in and their entire education has kind of been, hey, this is the final project for this class. You're going to do this and this and this, and the bullet points are the requirements. And on day one, I say, hey, they're like what you build and what company you're going to start in this is 100% you. I'm giving you no ideas. I'm going to guide you as if I were a VC or a mentor, and we kind of go from there. And built along the way, we have some reward systems. We reward the person who comes up with the best pitch deck and potentially the person who has like the best empathy map for their users or can articulate their problem statement the best. And I find that when I do those things, it does encourage a stronger response from my students. And so even in the educational space, just like you said, like this is your bread and butter, it works. Like it's a
Right.
very real, you can get very real responses in all of these different fields.
Well, and
And
college students, of course, seem like they're more open to it and they want things that are more game like. So I love when we started really focused just on corporate training, but then as we just started connecting with adult educators, and now we have, I don't know, probably about 30% of our students are in that higher ed arena. And I love what they're creating as far as courses for students. But like when we move over to corporate, we run into a lot we're serious people and we're doing serious work, and it's really time to put down those games and get to work. And it's the it's that correlation that gameplay means easy and people are slacking, rather than gameplay means it can be really challenging, and we give people a safe environment to try things out. Well, that didn't work. What else can we try? Well, that didn't work. What else can we try? So when you
So
think about, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, Monica, we feel your pain. We
Yeah.
wrote a whole chapter on selling your gamification strategy.
Well, I
We
was
tear
going to take it to the
it down.
book because I was
Oh,
thinking in your book, you talk about like you're bringing these game elements, gamification into like different areas, not, but like your
yeah.
personal life and your school, right? So you put one chapter on selling. Well, that's a good idea. So give me a tip. How do I sell this gamification to corporate training?
Yeah, great. We'll go through the progress. First, you have to put we I always start with like the Dale Carnegie principles, right? And it's like, how do you win friends and influence people? So you have to understand the person that you're selling to first and foremost, right? What are their goals? What are their interests? How are they like? What type of gamer are they? Right? Like maybe if you put like a role-based strategy game, they're like, no, I don't like games. But maybe if you did something like Words with Friends or I don't know, something else, right? It's like maybe they might be
Right.
more attracted to different game mechanics. But it really comes to just like framing your argument. In the book, we reference Barbara Minto's The Principle. Oh my God.
Oh, progress
Par-
principle?
yes, The Principle
The-
strategy. By,
Is the progress principle that she wrote that book? Blue and yellow. Is that the one?
yeah, I don't know why I'm blanking on it right now. We literally wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
The Pyramid Principle.
Oh,
So
see, different book. Okay,
yeah,
because I wrote a coaching course for a client and stumbled upon the progress principle, and I was like, This is really good." But you're talking a different book. So what is it called?
Barbara Minto, The Pyramid Principles.
Okay, go ahead.
And it starts out with framing your argument, right? So going directly is like, hey, we're going to do gamification because it's going to increase your engagement by 20%. And here's how. Fact one, right? Pull the statistics. We've done our research. We found this report that in HR, when new employees are onboarded with game tactics, it increases learning and development and retention of this knowledge by 70%. I'm just making up these numbers right now, but they're there. They're in the research that we did. We reference it in the book. And then you go through your three pillars of argument, right? So like, here are the facts, here's that backs them up, and this is how we're going to do it. And then at the end, you reframe the argument. And again, in the message that they want to hear, your statistics should align with their goal. If their
Right,
goal as part of corporate is to increase whatever metric, your argument has to be aligned to that metric and make the principle and supporting arguments of how that you're going to get there. And then that's the first step. And the second step too, especially it's harder when you're a consultant on the outside. I'm sure you know this too. Like it's harder to build that relationship if you don't see them every day. When I was in industry and I saw my boss every day, right? You could learn about them, you could see what they like, what they don't like, and you really get to know them and try to relate your messaging and your argument into things that they'll understand, right? Or metaphors and correlations that they get. And there's other things that go into it, but just for the sake of time, that's one of the key things that we bring into it. And just for the justification that you have to have a business plan too, right? And you're not doing gamification just for the sake of doing gamification because it's
right.
fun. You're doing gamification because it works, because it's a mean to get to your goal, which is not gamification. So come in with a business plan, make a strong argument, and be really cognizant of getting to know the person that you're pitching to.
Yeah, that's really good. I was just thinking when you said, this is just a thought, but
Mhm.
like when you said words with friends, and then of course Bret's last name is Wardle, so Bret's really bringing in the bucks because he made up that game with Wardle in New York Times. Not true, but I wonder if people really think that they're playing a game when they play that. Like they'll say, "I'm playing words with friends," but I think it's framed differently in their minds that this isn't. It's not a game because you're still trying to beat someone, but it's also just about the intellectual challenge of it. So it's not like I'm playing a game. I'm playing with my friends. Yes, I am. But I think the approach to it's a little bit different, which is a great thought because when we're doing things like this in the workplace, it should be some of the most, to me, when we're bringing games of any kind, gamification, game based, it should be some of the most challenging work that we do is to figure out how to play this and how it's going to impact and then make the correlation between what we're doing. Like, let's just say negotiations, for example. I can bring in a game off the shelf, off of any toy store shelf, and we could play a negotiation game, or I could actually create a negotiation game. But it should be challenging. Like, oh, like negotiation is a real skill to develop, and playing a quick little game can kind of like activate that to have that play happen. All right, so talk with me now about your industry though with product. So how, like, what resources, if I really wanted to understand how to use game besides your book, which I'm sure will help tremendously, but if I really wanted to understand how to use game psychology, game design thinking, gamification for my products, where would I start?
Well, the thing that I always suggest, and Mike, you can jump in as well, but I always go back to play more games. Start with the source material. If you want to understand why people enjoy games, why people play them, why we talk about them, I still have games of Monopoly that went down 10, 20 years ago that are brought up at family reunions and brought up like we talk about these things, we socialize around them. Go out and play them, and you'll start to understand more and more why we do this stuff. Play them as a team. Like you said, like you can pull a game off of a shelf and play it with your team. Like even in that, in an educational space or whatever, it's even if it's just a social experiment and getting people to kind of break the ice or work together or work in teams or work against each other, even in some cases, like those can be bonding experiences. And that idea of play and the idea of games is a great way to start. Like the way that I got into it is exactly that. Like I'm a gamer at heart, and I wanted to see those things that I love playing games for translate into the software world. I can get into a game and play for 5, 6 hours and kind of forget, like, oh, I was supposed to do so many things today
Right.
and I got lost. But when I'm working on something at my job, it's pretty far and few between that I get a moment where I'm like 5, 6 hours head down that I forget where I was, where I'm really in that state of flow. But it doesn't have to be. Like I think we can use a lot of those same mechanics, a lot of those reward systems and cues and nudges, like Mike mentioned, to get people to that state with their products and with the softwares we use and with training materials. Like training materials are a great example of where sometimes it's hard to sit down and you're like, oh god, I really have to do this training module, or we do this
Right.
every 6 months. And but if that were flipped and you were excited to get these done, or you enjoyed the social experiment, maybe we do make them more social and it's more of a like conversation of doing these sorts of modules and training. That kind of flips it on its head and can make the things that seem tedious become rewarding.
Yeah,
And Brett,
that's
who,
good. And Mike,
yeah,
when we're talking products and you think about game psychology, gamification, are you focused on internal for sales teams and production, or are you focused on external for customer facing to bring people in to use your product or service? Which way do you focus, or both?
both, both.
Okay.
So there's the core skills of product development, especially digital product development, focus on creating the software. And that software, the end user could change, right? It could be the end user, it could be someone at your company. And we also devoted a whole chapter to gamifying your processes. So there's, for example, um, we're an agile, I teach and build products in an agile fashion, and that's in 2 week sprints. So at the end of every 2 weeks, there's a retrospective, and we look back at what went right, what went wrong, things like that. Well, when you have that same meeting over again every 2 weeks, and some of these projects go on for 15 months, it gets incredibly stale, right? So one of my favorites I started implementing was doing a Mario Kart retrospective. Now, are the questions the same? Kinda. The outcomes are the same, but it's on the whiteboard where it's Mario, or on the mural board, right? And then we put the red shells and the stars, and we relate the questions to some of the game mechanics in Mario. And then we'll do a Star Wars theme, an Office theme. Those themed retros and kind of like gamifying it or using games as an example makes it more fun. And
Right.
sometimes open up a little bit more, right? Because they're not dreading as much going to it. It's good for team morale.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I like it. And again, it doesn't mean that we're doing easy work. This is hard work.
Yeah.
But it's and it just keeps going on, and we have to keep moving it forward. I really like it. Like it a lot.
And
When
then
you
just to
think
your last
about
question, oh, sorry, just to go off your last
Go ahead.
question, make sure we wrap this up. Like, Brett, could you talk about some of the people in gamification that influence you that you reference because I knew a few of them. Bret brought some more to the table. I learned a ton from Bret during the process and studied a lot of works. And our book takes references, I think, from like 30 or 40 other publications. Bret, you want to talk about some of the people in gamification
Yeah,
that you reference and talk
yeah.
about?
I mean, for me, like the one of the big ones for me is right as I was trying to make that move from games to software, I got my hands on Gabe Zickerman's book, Gamification by Design. And that was a game changer for me. I was searching for, hey, what other roles can game designers have? And somewhere along the lines, I stumbled across that book. I can't even remember
Mhm.
where. I don't know if a friend lent it to me or what, but I read that. And that was kind of the like aha moment for me where it was like, hey, this is what I've been doing for 10 years. This is like a new book, newly published, but I've been doing this for 10 years in this other space that people don't really understand that game design was even a thing. When I told people I was a game designer, they were like, "Oh, so you like write the code and do all the programming?" And I'm like, "No, not at all. Like that's not at all my skill set." They're like, "Oh, so you're like an artist, draws
Right.
everything and
Yeah.
designs the
Yeah.
world." And you're like, "Nope, that's not it either." And when I found that book, that was kind of my leaping point to having this like, "Oh, this can exist in software." And Gabe was like, me and Mike were kind of honored. Gabe wrote the foreword for our book. Like I
Oh,
reached
that's
out to him and said,
nice.
"Hey, you inspired what I've been doing and kind of led me down that path." And Yukai Chow is another one that I also kind of admired the approach he took. He's a gamer at heart and really looks at like, hey, what do games do well and how can we apply those to software? And I think both of those inspired me, like in writing this book, it inspired me in my career.
Yeah, that's good. As you think about people like Gabe and Yukai and the tie-in of exactly that, why do we like a certain game, or why do people play a certain game, or why do I not like a certain game, right? Like, what are the mechanics in that gameplay that I'm really more about the social side of things than about the strategic side. I'm just really there because that's where everybody else is, right? That's where I want to be. But there's others that, and do we play a collaborative game? Why would we even play a collaborative game? That doesn't even make any sense because there needs to be this win state with a definite winner, and I don't want to collaborate, right? But as we think through all of the ways that gameplay can happen and in real life, and I'm just a firm believer that we all play games all day long to make things that were not so desirable for us to do to get like just 3 more minutes, just 5 more pages, or whatever that looks like. We play these own little games. So, as you think about what games have really inspired you, do you have any that, as you think about, I really like the gameplay of X. And so as I'm thinking about design, I think about how that game plays. Do you have any of those favorites that you go to? Let me go to Mike first on that.
Yes, for sure. I think, and we talked about some of this in our presentation. uh, One of the games I remember most, like growing up, is Final Fantasy VII, because it was the story that made me want to play the game more, and the twists and turns and the plot. And it was just, at the time in the original PlayStation, the graphics were amazing, right? So visual design, story, gameplay, amazing. Again, where I think as technology moves forward, like The Witcher Wild Hunt, the story changes based on the actions that you take in the game, right? And there's just so many other types of game mechanics layered into it and games within the game. And then I just got today, so I'll be probably not paying attention to anyone for a couple weeks, but I just got the pre-release of Spider-Man 2. And I love that game because I'm a big Spider-Man fan, and I got it pre-ordered for my birthday, and it came today, and I was like a little kid again.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting, I have
Yeah.
it downloaded on the PlayStation, and when we're done here, I'm going to go play it. And
Right.
I love it because it's the combination of great storyline, amazing graphics, easy to play. You get to level up your characters, you get to custom build your characters and the storyline, and those are the games that motivate me. And I think learned a lot. Again, we're working with Bret, like as a product developer, how important the story is to your product. People understand, what are they trying to get out of
Mhm.
it, right? So those, even just the element of storytelling in gameplay is a huge factor that I think is overlooked.
Yeah. Storytelling is huge. And Brett, I want to come to you. And when you think about that, like when my sons were like when they were playing Mario when they were in their teens, the graphics weren't very good, right? I mean, it was, but they were still there for hours. Like,
Mm.
Jacob's got to go home because you got school tomorrow, and no, we just got started. No, yeah. But I think back to all the way back to things like Zork, right? Like, there's
Mm.
no there. All of that was here. The graphics were all in our head as we
Mm.
are reading through these different scenarios. That's what's always attracted me too, is the narrative. It's a solid part of our design process. So at Sententia, we've really codified how to bring gamification or game-based learning into corporate training. And we have a definite part where narration or at least a context, because that's how our brains think. Like I got to put it somewhere. What drawer can I put this in? And I need some little context to wrap that around so I can remember it. Because that's part of the key thing with training is we got to be able to attach it to something they can remember and then go find it. So I love that. What about you, Bret?
Yeah,
Games.
yeah. As far as games, like I gave a TED talk about why I think Super Metroid is the greatest digital experience ever created. So I won't dive too much into that. You can go watch that. But the one that always stands out to me is Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Came out like right at the tail end of like when I was in high school. I'm kind of aging myself here a little bit, but I've always struggled with time management and prioritization like in my life. And I still do. Like I'm still not amazing at it. But that game, like the skills that I learned in that game, quite literally changed my life. Like they helped me realize, like, oh, you're going to need to learn to map out these days. Like for anyone that's played that game, it's cyclical. You play the same 3 days over and over, and the NPCs are in the same spots at any point during those 3 days. And you have to look at you have this calendar where you can keep track of, okay, the Lon Lon Ranch stuff is happening on day one at 7 p.m. And that doing that in that game changed the way that I look at how I can prioritize tasks. It made me realize, no, I do have to start writing stuff down and keeping track of where I need to be, what I need to do, what assignments are due, how I handle that. And it also made me realize, like, because if you get to day 3, all you do is you play the Song of Time and you go back to day 1. It made me realize there's always tomorrow. If I don't get something done, I used to get incredibly stressed. And part of that is like ADHD, and part of that is just my like completionist personality.
Hmm.
But I would have like breakdowns, and it really helped me realize, like, no, breathe, go to sleep, wake up, and tomorrow is another day that it can still be on your calendar. You can still do all of that stuff tomorrow. So that game, like, quite honestly changed my life. And that's kind of what I love diving into with people, is that story of like, hey, there's these games all over the place that not only are they incredible experiences, but they teach us stuff, and they can be difficult too. The thing that you've said a couple of times that I love is, hey, these are difficult tasks, and people look at games as fun. Well, some of the most popular games in the last couple of years are insanely difficult. Like you look at
Right.
the Demon Souls style games, like those are crazy hard. So it's not like games are just fun and easy. People love games because they are a challenge. So when we say, "Oh, this is difficult stuff. This isn't fun. We don't want games." Well, a lot of times games aren't fun. Like games can be frustrating, and that frustration is where the payoff comes from. Games wouldn't be as
Right.
rewarding if they were easy to come by. If even the little social games we played, the Wordles and Words with Friends, were easy, no one would play them because everyone would get the answer in 1 or 2 tries, and very quickly it would be boring to play. The
Right.
reward comes when you do get it on that first or second try, and it's like, hey, I accomplished something that isn't the norm. Like I've done something that is not the norm to accomplish, and by having that difficulty, the reward is more sweet.
Yeah. I think that and we have a real, so in my field in L&D, the one thing that we have a real tendency to want to make it easier for the learner. Like we just kind of want to spoon feed you, but we know that there's really no learning that can happen when it's just they didn't have to work
Yep,
for it. They didn't have to
yep.
overcome something. I just read a really short article this morning, but it's reverberating. But it was about, we've started our new Game Garage, which is a community site. And I keep talking about we've got to lower the barrier to entry because it's a little bit intricate. But I read this article this morning about how making your onboarding easier actually decreases the overall user experience and decreases your outcomes that you're looking for, because no one likes, we all say we want it easier, but no one really likes easy, right? Like we like it once, but we want to accomplish something, like you said, that's outside, like, hey, I did that. So that's really good. I like it a lot. All right. I got to wrap this. So what is one thing I haven't hit, Mike, that you think we should talk about? Is there something I haven't mentioned or something you want to kind of emphasize that we haven't touched on?
I think one thing that we don't emphasize enough in our promotion for the book is that we gamified the book.
Oh, well, there. See, that's brand new information to me. All right. So how did you do that? What did you do? Or
I'm not gonna tell you everything.
give me a little bit. Give me a
Yeah.
little bit. Okay.
So there's definitely a treasure map inside the book. So there's some things that are off. And if you notice these things and put it together, there's the address to our website at the end of the book. And on our website, we have a tab for secret code. So if you find the secret code in the book and go to our website, we have some prizes and rewards for you.
Okay. So let me just clarify. Are you not telling people it was gamified and I just let the cat out of the bag, or you are telling people that there's a secret code to find?
No, I think we should start telling people that there's a secret code
Yeah.
to find.
We're telling select audiences
All right.
that
Select
there's something in there.
coming bookstore near you. All right. That's fun. I like
Yep.
it. I like it. Again, imagine discovering that, which is really interesting to me, especially get my audience is L&D. The pushback I get when things are a little bit tough. Well, that was a little tough. Yeah, it was a little tough. How do you feel about finding it? That's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
good. What about you, Brett? Something that you think we should talk that I haven't mentioned?
I don't think so. Like, I think we've had a great conversation. I always push for playing more games and evaluating experiences. That's what I'd mention to everyone is get out there and play games. Take
Yeah,
recommendations from friends and see what else is out there.
right. We do 3 levels of certification working with L&D professionals, and our master craftsmen, the one of the key requirement is they have to actually deploy a live project. So we're past theory now. We got to design and deploy to a targeted audience. But it's like a 9 month. It takes, we do masterminding, but 30 days before we do our intensive design, we start with a 30-day challenge of playing games you wouldn't normally play.
Yep.
And just like, why don't I like these types of games? And I'm going to play it. And then we share, we discuss and debrief and what was the experience of it. And it's always such an eye opener because everyone has different likes. So someone's like, well, I like this game. And so I try it. And I'm like, why would you like that game? And but it's I'm not into real shooter type games of any kind, bow and arrow. No, it doesn't matter. I don't, but narrative and beautiful graphics and even just fun, even ones that I can just kind of just challenge myself in just a fun kind of way. Those are good. But when you think about what we can, if we just stop to think about, well, why did I like this or why didn't I like this? And how can I use this? Because this is a really interesting. So, Jonathan, who's our chief motivation officer at Sententia, he has, I think, right now, I think he's at 210 different types of gameplay mechanics that, as we've just explored, we think, well, that's a good one to bring into an L&D, right? Into a corporate training. We should think about how we can use that. I remember we stumbled upon it late, and why late, I have no idea. But the whole concept of a saboteur, especially for things like cybersecurity, bank fraud, that's a great. And when you play a game where you see it, it's like, oh my gosh, look at what we could do with this kind of gameplay in a corporate training environment. So that's good advice, Brett. I like it.
Deception is one of my favorite emotions in games because it is a wild, wild loop. It's something that you don't see very often in games, but when it's there,
well, it's tricky, right?
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
You start questioning everything and everyone.
Yeah.
It will flip any social game on its head. If you introduce an element of deception, suddenly everyone is your enemy or everyone's your friend. It just completely changes the dynamics of a game.
Yeah, if you're trying to figure out, I like putting people in their reverse role, like they are the person who's trying to launder money, right? Like,
Yeah.
and if you can get through and get it done, what does that mean for the kind of, yeah. So that's really fun. Very good. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview with me, both of you. I'm just delighted. We really should see what else we can be doing together because although it's different fields, there still is that same, the core is the same, that everything that as we think through what we're doing for engagement, productivity, how can we move people that are not as engaged or get new people in. There's just so much we can bring from that whole game thinking side. So thank you so much. Appreciate both of you. And I hope that we have another conversation very soon. And for everyone else listening, thanks so much for tuning in to the Gamification Quest podcast. We'll be back again soon with another episode. So we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
This has been an episode of the Gamification Quest, brought to you by Sententia Inc. If you enjoyed this presentation, click the thumbs up button below and share your comments. If you'd like to stay in the conversation, click subscribe and ring the bell. You'll be alerted when another episode is released or when we upload an informative video on the gamification of learning. And thanks for all you do to put an end to dull, dry, boring learning experiences.